Welcome to the mathsmethods.com How to Improve Your Maths Mark webinar. Hi, I'm Alex. I'm the creator of a website called mathsmethods.com.au. Bit of history about me. I've been doing this for about a decade now. I've helped tens of thousands of students, teachers, parents, tutors, that sort of stuff. Published about 9 books, done a whole bunch of stuff. I've got degrees in maths and all that sort of fancy stuff. So I know a fair amount of what I'm talking about. I've had some pretty good results with students. Most students who work with me who are failing get up to around mid-70s. Those who are getting 60, 70%, we can get them up to 80, sometimes 90, as long as they do the things that I tell them to do. So hopefully I'm going to be able to help you guys out today as well. So in today's workshop, we're going to cover the importance of understanding fundamentals, how to study effectively, exam technique, avoiding procrastination, and my goal is to give you the tools you need to get the best possible marks. So hopefully that sounds good to a bunch of you. So the goal of your study, very, very sadly, is to get a good mark on your exam and on your assignments. One thing to think about is that you're always studying for the exam. So it could be January. I know it's a little bit later than that, but it could be January and the exam might be a year later, but you want to be focused on that from day one. You might have homework questions, tests, more textbook questions, another test. You don't want to focus on those things. You want to have your eye on the goal, which is knowing the entire content and being able to answer these more complicated type questions. So the best time to study for the exam is on day one. But I've got good news for you. The second best time is to study for the exam right now. So you don't really want to be studying for a test a week or two beforehand. If they've already told you about the test and you've only just started studying for it, it's a little bit too late. You should be studying for these sorts of things pretty much immediately and working on it every week, every time you study. The single biggest mistake that I see from students is that they spend too much study time on the wrong things, like reading the textbook, writing summary notes, making timetables, stressing, half study, half social media, that sort of stuff. When really what you've got to focus on with maths is doing. You need to be answering questions. So textbook questions, yeah, you want to get a pretty good understanding of that. But the real thing is exam style questions to get you prepared for the real task that you've got ahead of you. So maths is about doing questions, really. Anything else that you do is only so that you can do questions. And so everything should be aimed at that. There are 4 skills that you need to perform well in maths. Basically, it's understanding the concepts. And I've got video tutorials and workshops which can help you out with that. Answering textbook questions, answering tough exam questions, which I have in my other resources as well. These are your complex, unfamiliar worded questions. And then there's a completely separate skill, which is a skill of performing well in a test or an exam. This is a different skill from being able to answer exam style questions. And I'll go into that a lot more later. And by the way, guys, if you've got any questions or anything like that, feel free to type them into the chat and I'll answer them the best I can as I go along. But let's look at each one of these individually. So understanding the concepts. Most students don't know what they don't know, and this becomes a problem. So you can be smashing away at all those textbook questions and feel as confident as you can possibly feel, and then you get to a test or an exam and suddenly freak out. And this is because tests, exams, they all demand a higher level of understanding than what the textbook does. I'm going to go over some calculus to illustrate this. Please keep in mind I have year 10 to 12 students here and some parents as well. So this will be very basic for the year 12s and probably a little bit challenging for those in the younger years, but I'm going to keep this super basic. So what is calculus? Calculus is basically the subject to do with finding the gradients or the steepness of stuff on a curvy line. So we can assign a value to how steep it is. 3 is fairly steep, 1 is not that steep, and that sort of thing. So here we can see it's about 3. Here we have a steepness or gradient of 0, and here we have a gradient of -1. A positive gradient means the line's going up, whereas a negative gradient means it's going down. And you can see on the line the points where it's going up and going down. So in this section here, the line is just constantly going up. So this will be a positive gradient. Here it's all going down. So this will be a negative one. And we've got a little bit of positive on the end as well. Now, calculus is a bit like a gradient calculator. You put in the numbers and it pops out the gradient for you. So to give you a bit of an illustration of this, so let's say you've got -1 on this little number line here. And I'll just get my pen out. -1 on the number line here. If you chuck -1 into a gradient calculator, it will tell you that the gradient is about 2. Or you can chuck in 1 and it shows you that the gradient 0, or even 3 and it will show you that the gradient is -1. Literally, calculus is a gradient calculator. And this thing here is the gradient calculator. It's the gradient of the graph that you're trying to calculate. And every graph has its own gradient calculator. So here we've got a little curvy line there, and it has its own gradient calculator, which happens to be this. And the way it works, if you want to find the gradient at x equals 1, you sub in 1 into this, so it'll be 2 times 1 gives you 2, and that's the gradient at that point. If you want to find the gradient at -2, chuck -2 into our favorite gradient calculator there, and 2 times -2 gives you -4. And so this is negative because it's going down, and 4 because it's pretty steep. And if you want to find the gradient at x equals 0, you know it, you chuck in 0 into the gradient calculator, and that's going to give you 0 in this case. And you can see there that it's a horizontal line, there's no steepness, that's a gradient of 0. So you get to an exam question, something like this, and it's asking this thing here. And remember, this symbol means gradient calculator, and if it is smaller than 0, that just means the gradient is negative, or the slope's negative, it's going down. Negative gradient, going down. So what it's asking for here is, where is the gradient negative? And so if we look at our little graph here, we can see it's positive there, negative there, and positive here. And we just need to find which points this is occurring. So we're obviously going for the red here. And if we count 1, 2, 3, that's a value of -3 because it's in the negative direction. And here you can see it's 5 on 3 up there. And so if you go between these two values, that's going to be from -3 to 5 on 3. And so we have a symbol like this, which means starts at -3, goes all the way up to 5 on 3, and just means from -3 to 5 on 3. And so you look at the answers here, and it becomes pretty simple, and you get your question right. But if you don't understand the basics of the subject, you're not going to be able to answer these sorts of questions, or when they get a lot more complicated, and they do. So exam and test questions demand a higher level of understanding. That's why I made these things. And you don't want just to have a surface level of understanding. So the 4 skills to perform well in maths, now we're going to look at answering textbook questions. So students spend too much time on textbook questions, let me tell you. If you don't have time to do exam questions, which is usually my number one complaint, look, I'm studying methods an hour a night or whatever it is, and I've got all my other subjects as well. When do I fit in exam questions? Well, I'm going to show you. But this is what textbook questions are designed for. You get the simple questions and you answer it. And you do another one and you answer it. And pretty soon you can answer them pretty simply. And then suddenly you've done like a million of them and you feel like these are pretty easy and you don't really have a problem answering any of them, but you're kind of doing them anyway. Does anyone feel like that? Just let me know in the chat. And so students tend to keep doing textbook questions because it's comfortable. It feels good. Yeah, we've got a whole bunch of yeses coming up. But if you're not feeling challenged, why are you wasting your time? Do some exam questions. You want to do the types of questions that are actually going to be in your exam. So the purpose of textbook questions is to practice the basics. If you want to get good at exams, you need to practice exam questions. So what do? Well, let's say this is your study time. This might be 5 minutes, hopefully not. It might be an hour, it might be 45 minutes. I don't know. Whatever your study time is on methods. Ideally, you should be spending half of it on textbook questions, understanding the basics, and the other half on exam questions. And ideally, 100% of the time on exam questions, because this is the thing you're going to be tested on. But once you understand how to do the textbook questions, it's time to do something more challenging. So your time's valuable, guys. It's really valuable. So make sure you spend time on things which are actually improving you. Got a question here. How do you find exam questions? Well, I'm going to be sending out a whole bunch of ones to you tonight, which are basically just functions and relations type stuff. Hopefully that's going to be helpful. But there's a whole bunch of different resources that you can get which divide the topics up into different sections so you can practice the key skill that you want to learn. I've made hundreds of exam questions myself based on real exams, and I find that these are the most useful for students. But every time you study, do some exam practice, every time, even if it's only 15 minutes, even if you don't increase your study time and you have to swap out a few textbook questions. So 4 skills to perform well in maths. We've covered the first 2. The next one is answering tough exam questions. These complex, unfamiliar, worded questions.